Welcome, everybody, to the second ever Fintech Compliance Chronicles video interview podcast. We're still trying to figure out what to call this thing. But I'm really, really honored to be joined today by Nicky Senyard, who is the CEO and founder of Fintech Connect. So Nicky and I have had the pleasure of getting to know one another over the last several months, last year, and really proud to have her join us today to learn a little bit more about her, Fintech Connect, the products they've got going on. So, and really, as we're called Fintech Compliance Chronicles, everything we're going to talk about is going to be set against the backdrop of compliance. So, Nicky, if you could just briefly introduce yourself for our viewers, our listeners, and just tell us a little bit about your story. Would love to have you share what I've learned with everyone else.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think what you're doing is incredibly cool in a really niche market, approaching it in such a accessible manner. So I'm very honored to be here. So thank you. As you said, my name is Nicky Senyard. I'm CEO and founder of Fintech Connect. We come to compliance in a bit of a roundabout way. So our core business is on net new acquisition for banking products. So whether that be a CD product, a savings account, a business savings account, a business loan, a mortgage, we really are on the net new acquisition side of it. But the way we do it is a little bit unique. So we do it through third parties. So the third parties are the NerdWallets of the world, the Credit Karmas, the Business Insider, the Forbes. And we, as a technology platform, are the plumbing behind all of that allows the banks to pay for only net new acquisitions. So as you can imagine, we're working through third parties, and there's a commercial relationship between the banking product or the credit union product and the third party, which means, as everybody knows in the compliance world, it means that the behavior of these third parties related to that product has an implication on the bank. So as we were developing out our own business, we developed out a tool for ourselves to look at policing content. So what we're looking at doing is making sure that when an interest rate changes or a product description changes or any of those things that are crucially important to FDIC or fair loan practices or any of those sorts of things, we need to make sure that the content's updated. So as we deep dive, and we decided to use machine learning and AI technology to help us do this. So like any tool, the tool can't manage us. We need to manage the tool. So we were developing it as a utility function as we grow our business and keep our clients safe. So the very curious thing is, the more that I started to look at it from our perspective of net new acquisition and all of those sorts of things, it opened the door to your world, which is in banking compliance. So I can't say by any stretch of the imagination I'm an expert, but I've got to tell you, I have learned so much in the last 2 years, so much. I have learned that banking compliance teams are significantly overworked. They are the place that protects the bank, and yet they are under so much pressure because of volume of work, of the attention to detail, of all of this sort of reporting elements that all of the regulators are doing on the banks. So I've come to realize the very pressure cooker environment a lot of compliance people are under. So I've decided to make it my mission to see if I could alleviate a little bit of that pressure by developing a tool that provides really good utility in this whole content compliance world. Just before we go on, I just wanted to do one thing for the listeners to put this all into context for them, if that's okay. So in my viewing of marketing compliance, there are sort of layers to it. So one layer is where you're looking after the brand. So it's brand messaging and all of those sorts of things. And people have tools that go and crawl the web for that. That's not what we do, because that I have worked out creates a lot of work for compliance people, because a lot of them are just mentions that need to be reviewed, but aren't necessarily mission critical in terms of the relationship with the regulators and the regulations and all of those sorts of things. And where we do is a small little part of this very big compliance pie that is just about content compliance on websites that have a commercial relationship with the bank. Now, as we know, that could either be a marketing channel like a Forbes or a Business Insider, or it could be a banking as service fintech. So interestingly enough, I found actually multiple uses for this one tool. So that's how the story creates. So that's how I sort of like have a toe in your water, a toe in your pond with this content compliance.
Well, that's really really helpful, and it helps us set the stage a little bit. And I think you talked about, kind of getting into the compliance space, and I would argue that your timing is impeccable, because as many of our listeners and viewers will know, this past year the three major federal regulators put out revised third-party risk management guidance, and they haven't done that for almost I think dating back almost 10 years. So it's been quite a while.
Decade, yeah, I was going to say about a decade. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that in and of itself was kind of concerning. But since then, I have had the pleasure of going to a number of events, talking with a number of compliance professionals, meeting you and your colleague Elena Levine, who's CRO at the Money 2020 conference in Las Vegas, and hearing over there all this talk about BaaS, and banking as a service, for those who don't know what I mean when I'm making this sound something called BaaS. And the reason I bring that up is because there has become such a concern about many regulators actually not necessarily going after, but really holding the banks up to very high standards for not necessarily the work that they're doing directly, but the work that their fintech or partners are doing on their behalf. So in many cases, the fintechs may presume, well, we're not regulated, we're not affiliated with the banks, we're just doing work for these banks that may or may not have these regulatory requirements. And I think what it goes to show is that banks need to recognize that any of their third parties, as you mentioned, they're going to be on the hook for whatever they do, especially if they're representing those banks. So thus, I think everything you said, the need for the services you provide is more timely, I think, than probably has ever been in the past, as well as others who are also trying to get involved in this space. So thanks for setting the stage for us. So I want to actually focus on, I know you talked about the servicing piece that you all are able to provide, as well as marketing compliance. But I actually want to stop and focus on marketing compliance for a second. So, I've had the opportunity to look at disclosures and look at advertisements in past life. And it comes to marketing compliance, sometimes it can be really nebulous because so much of it can be qualitative. Of course, there's quantitative components, to be sure, when you think about things like pricing. But sometimes one of the issues that regulators will go really into in particular is false claims, right? So how do you think about something like false claims in the context of your product? Let's say, if you're thinking about something like influencer marketing, right? I'm not sure if any of your third parties that you work with or the bank that have third parties deal with that. But what's your take on the claims or the qualitative elements of marketing compliance? For example, like FTC has started to go after some institutions for this false claims piece. I'm curious for what's your take on that, and what FinTech Connect could do to address that risk.
So I think the interesting thing that when we talk to banks with marketing compliance, we break it down into two very distinct pods, I suppose. One is things that we evaluate, which are things like the wording on a disclaimer. Like a fintech can't say they're the bank, or Fintech can't say that they're FDI insured because it's actually the bank that's FDI insured. So we talked in our world about those terms that can be evaluated, like it's a pass or a fail, it can be evaluated. And then you talk about terms that create a misleading environment, or in terms of what you're referencing. And we talk about those terms being monitored. It's very interesting that when you do this day in and day out, you get to understand what we call trigger terms. Trigger terms that when you cluster them all together, they give you a pretty good indication whether it's down that slippery slope of a wrong impression, or whether it's just a term that's being used in proper context. Because it's the context of these things that are most important, not anything else. And this goes far beyond just influencers. This goes beyond, it goes into every type of digital presentation that a third party can do related to the banking product that they're connected to the bank with. So the way that our technology does, it's especially for websites and content, is that we're looking at trigger terms that we monitor, like free and free commission and all of those sorts of things, because we know that from our feedback with our banking partners that what they're looking for to make sure that the disclosures, or make sure that the context of those words, somebody could put free on their website, but when you talk about a free banking product, that may or may not be indicative or misleading. So that's the way we've actually seen that to be really important to the banks that we work with. And it was really good insight, because we didn't understand that coming into it, because we were just solely focused on the evaluation element of it, because in our core business, that's what's really important. But as we started working with the compliance, the frontline compliance people, we worked out that these trigger terms were of equal importance in their daily function. So that's how we've done it. It is as you know, the regulatory bodies each have a slightly different focus, each of equal importance, but some are more on the fair lending side, which is, UDAP and making sure that everything's accessible, whereas the FDIC is much more about the things that they're doing. So each body has their own remit, as it were, and therefore the trigger terms can be similar or different depending on the body that is the dominant audience in the policing of the content.
That actually, when you're talking about trigger terms, that actually leads me to my next question, which I will say, for the audience's benefit, I had the opportunity to take a look at Fintel Check, the product, one of the products that you all offer. And so one of the features that was really fascinating to me was what I think is called the rule manager, part of your product. So, when you're talking about trigger terms and, how we think about this rule manager, maybe if you could give our viewers, listeners, some background on how this rule manager piece plays into that, and, maybe just talk about like the complexity it can handle, like how does it scrape, maybe some instances, to the extent you can talk about where you've seen it really work like powerfully. If you can just maybe talk a little bit about that feature in the product.
Sure, absolutely. So the way, when you're looking at a tool like this, we had to come up with the logic, because the fact is, if we were going to, and when we talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's all very well and good, but we want it to be practical and we want there to be utility. So we had to work out how we were going to do it. So what we decided to do is that we decided to have it based on what we classify as rules. So these rules are what the engine evaluates the content against, to work out whether, from an evaluation perspective, like the interest rate is correct or it's wrong, or to find the trigger term and say, we found this. So the rules we do on different levels. So for example, with a complex rule, we can say an interest rate needs to be 12%, And or if you say we need to have the word FDIC needs to be on the page, and then we can have what the FDIC disclaimer needs to be. So it may be that it passes for the 12%, but the FDI disclaimer is wrong. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get as much flexibility from a natural logic perspective into using the tool as we possibly can. But the great thing about the way that we've developed our rules manager is it's based on a product feed, which is really unique in the marketplace, which means that the user of the tool has almost a library of specific elements like interest rate, disclaimer, product description. There's a whole lot of, it's a library. And what happens is that library data points are then pulled into the rule. So you can update the data library, but you don't need to then update the rules because it's already automatically connected. All of these little things that we're trying to do to just slipstream the administration of all of the things that are going on. And so when the report runs based on the rules, we're actually able to show a screen capture of what we've done on the page to say bank name, product name, rule. So there's quite a number of variables in that. We take the screenshot. We can tell you whether the rule was a pass or a fail on the evaluation side, and we can show that we found the term on the monitoring side, and you can see what rule we've associated with it. So I don't know if that was a very complicated description, but the utility of it is very helpful for discovery. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide all of this information to the compliance analyst in a way that is easy to review and synthesize so that they can actually get on and apply the intelligence that they need to do their job, as opposed to the discovery element of trying to find these mentions.
Yeah, no, I think it really gets to something that, you know, as being an auditor myself, it's come up a lot in that, you know, we're not necessarily, when we're talking about, you know, a tool that's powered by machine learning, for example, like Fintech, that it's not necessarily replacing the analyst, as you said, right? But it's sort of saving them a lot of time in, as you said, the discovery piece, that searching piece, that pulling of information piece, and it's sort of queuing it up to them so that they then can make that decision. But on that point, let's sort of carry it forward. You mentioned machine learning. I mean, where do you think something like, you know, artificial intelligence, generative AI, et cetera, could play into either Fintech or, you know, just the general space of tools, you know, like Fintech, or maybe your own roadmap in the future? Would love to see how you think this could play out.
I think the really interesting thing with cutting edge technology, which is what we know artificial intelligence is that any cutting edge technology will morph itself into uses that we haven't even perceived yet. Because what I find fascinating is that every element of every person's domain, career domain, whatever else, everybody has one unique problem or a unique set of problems that they're trying to solve, that something that is as an amorphous as artificial intelligence is applied in a really unique way each time. So I think when it comes to marketing and compliance, one of the things that I'm very conscious of is using the tool in a very functional and predictable manner. Because when it comes to compliance, it's about safety and it's about reputation and it's about the regulators. So what we're trying to do is use the power of the discernment without giving the power of decision to the tool. So the tool is there providing information, but it's really still up to the analyst to actually interpret that information so that there is still, the human brain is a fascinating thing and it can do multitasking incredibly well in a way that AI, I don't know we'll ever be able to do. Maybe 20 years time, I'll be proven completely wrong. But the thing is, you still have to understand what you're looking for and understand the implications of your choices. You know what they say, garbage in, garbage out. So that's my personal view, is AI still a tool. It's a really super cool, like on steroids tool, but it's still a tool, which means I don't think our lessons from compliance professionals gives us the ability to use this tool or this intelligence in a really cool manner, but it still doesn't replace the millions of decisions that a person makes when they look at something. It just can't.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was going to say, I mean, when you explaining that, I was thinking, even if you think about in 2023, I think, like, just granted, it's in 2022 and before as well, but really in 2023 with ChatGPT and generative AI and on and on, there was this thought that, okay, like, this is it. Like, this is the beginning of humans becoming obsolete. And what folks found much later, granted, not limited to fintech or marketing compliance or compliance in general, but it found that a lot of these tools are actually spitting back a lot of fake information, not necessarily because of any malicious intent of the program, but just the real thing I found in my experience was that these tools are simply not plugged in or looped into enough data, the infinite amounts of data that are out there. Like, there's still just not doesn't seem to be a way yet for that sort of like data to fully be integrated into what these tools are capable of.
But I think it's also discernment. Discernment is such a fragile thing. It's sort of like, it can't be described. It can't be. Discernment is the thing that it takes. If you look at a professional that's been doing the same element for 20 years, their discernment is going to be so much sharper than somebody that's been doing it for 2 years, because they've seen so much more. So what I'm talking about with AI, so that's why I'm saying in 20 years time, maybe I'm talking about something different. But when I read something that I've done, or read something that has come through generative AI, it's just slightly wrong. Do you know what I mean? But that slightly wrong shows the degree that I can discern that it's slightly wrong, but I've been doing what I've been doing for 25 years. I don't know that a new graduate would necessarily be able to discern that it was 10% off. And that's where I think what we're wanting to do is harness the utility of what this tool does without giving its rope to do discernment, because discernment has still got to be in the hands of the user, in my opinion, until I'm proven otherwise. But that's how I just see it at the moment.
100%. I mean, that professional you referred to, the 20 years of experience professional, I mean, they had a host of experiences through 20 years that they built on, they learned from, and I think it goes back to the concept of machine learning. So that the AI model, even in and of itself, needs to go through enough of those scenarios to be trained on enough of these scenarios where then maybe, as you said, right, 20 years down the road, like, it is able to have that discernment. Maybe it's not 20 years, maybe it's, like 2 years and it's more accelerated, right? But even still, it needs to have, to some degree, right, to some of the experiences that 20-year professional has. So I think those are fantastic points.
I think anytime you use anything, use a tool, be aware of its power, but also be aware of its pitfalls. And then you manage the pitfalls and you take advantage of the powers.
I 100% agree with that. I think that's very sage advice. So, just zooming out a little bit, maybe shifting from AI just back to the bank versus the third parties. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but your product is for banking institutions, who service or who partner with these third parties. Is that correct?
Yep, okay. Correct.
Okay, so when we're thinking about these third parties, so obviously the banking institutions, I'm sure they're going to be very interested and want to take advantage of the product. But let's maybe shift to those third parties. Have you, in working with these bank partners, have you been able to get a sense of how these third parties think about tools like yours? You had mentioned at the beginning, like policing, for
Absolutely.
example.
Yep,
Do
absolutely.
they feel? Go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like for example, do they feel like something like your tool or the services that you provide, is it maybe squeezing their business, or do they actually feel, especially in the wake of everything that's going on, that it might be actually helpful for them? So I'm curious, like what you've seen from the third party's perspective.
I actually think people that are genuinely wanting to build a business and generally want to play within the rules would like to take anything on board that will give them the power to be ahead of the pain. The pain being the regulators, or their just consent orders or whatever else. So we are actually finding that a lot of it all comes down to a price sensitivity, which we're very aware of. And really, people are wanting to use this sort of tool, and it's so early days. Everybody's just trying to, especially with the banking as service fintech partners. The banks themselves are building out their pipes. The fintech partners are starting to understand what's required. I think everybody, in my experience, really just wants to do a good job. And there's so many competitive pressures on everyone that sometimes they make a call with the knowledge that they have at the time, and it may not be the right call. But that doesn't mean that there's any sort of necessarily any maliciousness or underhanded stuff going on. It's just is that they're trying to do what they can with what they've got. So I absolutely find that everybody is sort of like really willing to participate. But everybody's being very pragmatic on bottom lines and not wanting to have extraneous overheads with the way that it goes. So that's why what we're trying to do with this tool is make it as pragmatic and as utilitarian as we possibly can, because then through the utility, it has value.
I think that word is very key, pragmatic, pragmatism. Because I've heard, for those who don't necessarily have as much experience dealing with a regulator, for example, or those who maybe never partnered with a third party, or a third party who's never really partnered with a bank before, they might have certain views about the other side of the coin or a regulator. And I think when folks that start to talk to each other and understand the views, including a regulator, I think that's what comes out. And that's what I've seen in my experience as well, dealing with, being part of an institution, dealing with third parties, talking to regulators. When everybody starts talking, you recognize that I don't think, for the most part, right, that people don't have malicious intent. They're trying to do the right thing. It's just, sometimes there's miscommunication. And frankly, those unresolved miscommunications can sometimes end up turning into regulatory matters, because, for a regulator's perspective, they couldn't really get comfort that, hey, this control that you have, this process you have, the tool you have is actually enough to mitigate the risk. So, with that said, I think that, the pragmatism is really like the best way to go from everybody's perspective. And that's really, remedied by more conversation. So, talking about conversation, this has been a fantastic conversation. I hope our viewers and listeners have really, learned a lot from you. I know I have. I've really just enjoyed, getting your perspective, sort of, having a conversation with you about marketing compliance, about Fintech Connect, about, banks, third parties. So just as maybe a closing question, where can those who might be interested in learning more about Fintech Connect, about Fintech Tech, your product, where would you like to hear those folks, who'd like to learn more?
Easiest way to do it is on our website, which is just fintelconnect.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Anybody can reach out to me. I'm lucky that my name's pretty unique. It's Nicky Senyard at LinkedIn, or just Nicky at fintelconnect.com. I think this is a really cool space. We're coming at it from a very non-traditional point of view, but I think the more people that add their perspective on something that I think is pretty crucially important. Because at the end of the day, the regulators are trying to protect consumers. They're not doing this because they're being mean. They're actually doing this because they have a really, really important function, which is to protect consumers' ability to understand and interact with finance. And so anything that I think we can do to understand the more of the issues, to be able to give utility and practicality to what we do, and to hone a product through feedback of actual practical people who are doing the job, I think puts us in a really good position. So I'm really happy to talk to people, and I'm really happy to get their feedback and perspective and all of those sorts of things. I think it's a really cool intersection in time.
That's fantastic. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
I think the openness with which and the willingness with which I'm talking to people in compliance, I find thrilling, because they really want to solve the problem, and it's a very collaborative approach. And I love the insight into the workflow processes, like if you find something, how is it handled and where does it go and what's important and all those sorts of things. So I really find that we're not there yet, but we've got sort of like very grand visions for what this can be in terms of helping people use their time and energy in a very productive manner. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, and I would say, from our side, I know that amongst the subscriber base of Fintech Compliance Chronicles, there's a host of experienced, knowledgeable compliance professionals who are hopefully watching this as you and I are talking. And so I would encourage those who are listening or viewing to reach out to Nicky, just to have a conversation. Even if you're not necessarily somebody who can use the product, I think it's just great to exchange perspectives. I know I've certainly valued the conversations I've had with you and your colleagues. So yeah, yep. I would encourage our viewers to just reach out if they can. Well, thank you so much, Nicky, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And best of luck to you and Fintel Connect as you move forward with your Fintel Tech and all your other products. And look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.